Hello everybody, thank you all for coming out on this cold winter night to the Bexley Public Library. My name is Zach Parrish, I'm the programming librarian here at the Bexley Library. So again, thank you for joining us in person. A really quick note on this program, it is a hybrid program, so we have an audience joining us at home as well over the live stream. So for any questions, try to project so that they can hear at home. And for those joining online at home, if you have any questions, type them into the chat and we will get them asked in the room. Our presenter tonight is Chris Anderson, who is a lifelong Ohio resident and a Rank the Vote Ohio speaker. Rank the Vote Ohio is a statewide, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization aiming to improve election integrity and reduce polarization through instant runoffs with ranked choice voting. Founded by a politically diverse group of volunteers in 2020, Rank the Vote Ohio educates fellow Buckeyes about ranked choice voting and its benefits in order to achieve their mission of greater choice, a stronger voice, and a representative democracy that works well for all Ohioans. Please join me in welcoming Chris Anderson.
Good evening, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Thanks so much for coming out. I do have, as you can see, a slide presentation, but the goal isn't to get through the slides. The goal is to answer your questions and have you leaving here feeling more educated and aware of what ranked choice voting is. So as I go through the presentation, please feel free to interrupt. You can say, hey, Chris, what about this? That's okay. We'll take the questions as we go through. But we'll also have a section at the end specifically for questions and answers if you want to wait for a bit. Okay? All right, so here's what we're going to do tonight. Introduction, current election system, explain RCD for those that aren't familiar with ranked choice voting, talk about advantages, talk about one of my favorite topics, common misconceptions, and then we'll talk about what's next. As Zach already said, we are a nonpartisan nonprofit. I'm going to be stressing the nonpartisan. So I have been in scenarios where people can come up to me and say, okay, I know a little bit about ranked choice voting. Does this help Republicans? Does it help Democrats? My answer is, that question doesn't really make sense to me. Once you understand what ranked choice voting is, you understand that the party has nothing to do with how ranked choice voting works. So this is a nonpartisan topic we're discussing. And after you learn about ranked choice voting, if you don't already, and you're describing it to someone and they say, well, that sounds kind of like a runoff. You say, yeah, ranked choice voting is kind of the same thing as an instant runoff election. And as Zach alluded to in the introduction, we at Rank the Vote Ohio, our goal is to educate and advocate. So obviously I'm a proponent of ranked choice voting, but our goal really is just to educate the public. And I'll repeat that URL that you see at the bottom of the screen at the end of the presentation. But that's the one that I really want you to remember. If you leave here and say, I really like to learn more, that's just the one you have to remember, rankthevoteohio.org. And we do have some cards up here for you to take something with you. Thank you, Grace. It's got the information on there, so you don't even have to write it down. You can just come up after the presentation and grab it. All right, shortcomings of our current election system. You probably didn't know it, but we're going to have a quiz later. Don't worry, we're not really going to score you all on the quiz results, but I'm giving you the questions ahead of time. Just keep those in your head as we kind of walk through how this works. So our current election system, and you may be like me, maybe about 2 years ago, if you said our current election system, I would have said, I don't even know what you really mean. We have elections, we vote, we elect people. What do you mean our election system? Well, our election system for cases where we're electing a single person. So I'm talking about governors, mayors, representatives, presidents, where you're electing a single person. The way our elections work today are called single choice plurality wins. Plurality means you get more votes than anybody else. Doesn't mean you got more than 50%, it just means you got more than everybody else. Another term that you'll hear used is first past the post. I tend not to use that, but if you hear first past the post, that's the same thing as single choice plurality wins or our current election system. So what is the problem with our single choice plurality wins? Well, you can get elected with less than 50%. Maybe you consider that a big problem, maybe you don't. Somehow seems intuitively wrong that you can get elected without getting 50%. And one of the biggest problems with our current system is people are afraid of the spoiler effect. So if you have two front runners, say one's a Republican, one's a Democrat, and you are somewhere else, maybe you're a moderate, maybe you're somewhere else on the spectrum, you may be afraid to run because you feel you're going to take votes away from somebody that you would rather win in that two-person race. So the spoiler effect, those of you that are old enough to remember Ross Perot, certainly can remember the presidential election. Was Ross Perot a spoiler or not? Who knows? You know, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. So we have that problem. We have today, particularly our two-party duopoly, Republicans, Democrats, third parties are generally seen as a problem. Who are they really helping? And that discourages candidates from running. So a lot of us are just stuck with, well, who did the Democrats give us, who did the Republicans give us? What if you don't like either? May happen, may not. So we certainly have some issues. So anyone, I think, and one of the reasons I mention this is when we talk about ranked choice voting or other systems of election, there are many out there. Again, this is something I was not aware of maybe 2 years ago, but I've learned quite a bit about. There are lots of others, we're not going to talk about the others, but we have our current system versus single choice, plurality wins, we have ranked choice voting, we have others. But they kind of, that's just the way it is right now, it kind of leaves us with very limited choices. So to demonstrate single choice plurality wins, and what I mean when I say people can win an election with a plurality, and not necessarily a majority, we're going to look at some actual Ohio elections. So these are examples where the winning candidate received plurality but not a majority. And these are ones I just went back and I started looking at the Secretary of State's website. If you haven't done that before, I encourage you to do that. There's actually a lot of data if you're a data running person. I'm an IT guy my whole career, so I'm very much a quantitative data person. But you can also go, there's other websites, ballotmedia.org is a good place where I got some of this data. And I want to say, when I put this slide deck together, I found these races, and I could say at the time, I didn't know anybody, any of these names that I'm going to show you. Now, since that time, I've come to know one of them. Mostly there's people I have no idea who they are. If they were in the room today, I probably wouldn't know, but I wouldn't recognize them. So 2018, Republican primary. I'll talk about primaries versus general elections in a minute, but these are mostly going to be from primary elections. So maybe hard to read the numbers, but it's the winner won 29.2% of the vote. You got someone else with 28, 17, 14, 6. I think most people look at this and say, I'm a little bit uncomfortable with this election. The winner won with 29%. That's not a resounding, like, hey, this is the person we really want to win. These are just other examples. 2018, winner with 40%, 16, 16, 14. This one's a little bit more clear cut. The winner had almost 47.5. They almost got there. But you look at these other two, 29 and 23. It does beg the question, well, what if there was only two people? Would it have been a much closer race? Another one here, 47%, similar to the last one. This is another interesting one. The second place person got 41, and the third place person got 11. Was that person more aligned with this one or more aligned with the middle one? You know, if that 11% would mostly gone to somebody else, if that third person wasn't running, who would have won the election? We have no way of knowing, of course, right? I mean, I'll point out one of the disadvantages with our single choice plurality wins. Again, I'm a data guy. As I say, we collected very little data from the voter. We asked them to circle one oval, period. We have no idea who their second choice or third choice. We only ask them that one piece of information. 2022 race. This one's interesting. 35.7 was the winner. She had a second candidate with 31%, a third candidate with 28. Again, does that give you resounding confidence that the person that won was really the person that most people wanted to win? I have no idea. I don't think anybody has a good idea. Because again, we didn't collect that data from the voters. All right, before I move on, any questions so far? So, one of the things I should probably mention is that ranked choice voting is a system that is used in the United States. It was used in the state of Maine since 2018, and the state of Alaska since 2022. In Alaska is a very interesting case. We can discuss that later if we have time, and if folks are interested in talking about that. This is actually a piece of a Maine ballot, and this is what we would see in Ohio, because again, we have single choice plurality win. If you're just asked, who do you want to vote for, right? You circle one oval. But in Maine, this is what the ballot actually looks like. So you circle who your first choice is, your second choice, third choice, and you don't have to. This is another thing when we get to common misconceptions. You rank them as far as you want to rank them. I would think it would be reasonable for a lot of people to say, hey, I know this person and that person. I have no idea these last two. I'm not going to even, I don't know whether it's third and fourth or fourth and third. I'm going to vote for my first and second choice, and after that, I don't have enough information to vote further. And that's fine. Ranked choice voting doesn't require you to rank every candidate. Oops, I gave away a question. All right, so in a ranked choice voting election, the winner is the one who achieves the majority of the votes. That can happen either right away. So right away, someone wins more than 50% of the first place votes. Election's over. They win. You don't need to go looking at second, third, fourth choices. They won. But the question comes, what if they didn't? No one got more than 50% of the first choice votes. How do you proceed? And we'll talk about it. The way you proceed is you take the candidate who received the least number of first place votes, so essentially the last place finisher. You look at those people's ballots and say, well, if your candidate is eliminated, that candidate got the least number of first place votes. Now, that candidate's gone. Who is your second choice? Those votes get tallied into the remainder. And you look back and say, did anybody get more than 50%? If yes, election's over. If no, we move on. So we're going to run through a couple of examples, and again, feel free to ask questions if I'm moving along too fast or if you don't understand. So example number one. Candidate number one got 55% of the first choice votes. Election's over. They won. Not difficult to understand. And by the way, these are both contrived examples. I don't think these correspond to any actual election. They're just created to demonstrate what RCD is. So you have 5 candidates again, but the first place finisher got 35%. And here's the distribution of the remaining votes. So no one got more than 50%. So what do? You take the last place finisher, you look at their ballots and say, your first place choice is gone. That person was eliminated. Who was your second choice? And you can kind of tell this is a fabricated example because in this case they took 9%, 4% went to number 2, 3% went to number 3, and 2% went to number 4. It'd be very unusual you have an election where 0% went to one of the, that no one voted for that first place. So again, you add these up again and say, did anybody get more than 50%? No, 35, 29, 22, 14. Still nobody with more than 50%. So what do? Take the last place finisher, number 4 here, take their 14%, and you redistribute it to the remaining candidates. Do we have anybody with more than 50%? Still not yet. So you take the last place finisher, number 3, take their 20%, and redistribute it, and now you have a winner.
How did you know how to redistribute them?
So you look at those ballots. So let's back up. So in this case, we're getting rid of candidate number 3. So you look for every ballot where candidate number 3 was the first choice. You kind of make that candidate disappear. I always like to think of it as a stack. So you take the top one off and everybody moves up one. So everyone that voted for candidate number 3 as their first choice, now their second choice becomes their vote. So you just look at those ballots where people voted for number 3 as their first choice.
How do you know that the first people who voted for the last, the lowest vote getter would bother say, don't count my vote at all, I don't like anybody else?
Right. So your question, I'll repeat for everyone's benefit. What if you stopped ranking? I think, so you're pointing out that in this case, we're assuming everyone filled out their ballot complete because the numbers are still adding to 100% and we're redistributing. So again, this is a contrived example. You may get to the case where you take this 14%, 1%, 7%, 6%, that adds up to 14. You're pointing out that what if they stopped ranking? So some ballots will essentially be discarded. And these numbers may only be 7 and 6. Maybe no one voted. That's a very good question because that scenario, there's a term that people use called exhausted ballots. And that's a common argument that opponents raise, saying, oh my God, we had exhausted ballots in this election, as if it's a problem. But we have that today, right? I can go into an election, I see maybe some obscure race, I look at the candidates, I say, I don't know any of those candidates. I'm not going to cast a vote just based on their name. I don't vote. Now, no one uses the term exhausted ballots in today's system, but it's the same scenario. So you're right, that's a good observation. This is kind of assuming that the way these numbers are presented, it kind of assumes that everyone completely filled out their ballots, but it doesn't have to be that way. Yeah.
The scenario you have here, the candidate with 14%, so he's out of the race, and then his votes, people who voted for him as their number 1, will now be
Redistributed.
what if those people voted for the blue guy on the far
Right.
right? If their next choice is no longer in the running.
Right. So the question is, what if these 14% seem like, hey, wait a minute, these are distributed fully. What if 2% of these ballots, they actually pick the guy the person who's already eliminated?
Right.
Well, that's why you rank them, and why I say think of it as a stack. So when number 5 was eliminated, conceptually he's eliminated from all ballots, and everyone else's choice has been moved up. So if I had selected candidate 4 as my first choice, and candidate 5 as my second choice,
Right.
by the time I get to this round, and candidate 4, it's my third choice that's now going to be counted for one.
So it may be the third choice for this guy, but the second choice for somebody else, as it gets
Yeah.
redistributed.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily everyone's first, everyone's second.
Oh, no. So, right. So, question again, just to make sure people on the recording understand. When this candidate is eliminated, when that candidate is eliminated, they're conceptually eliminated from everybody's ballot, and their choices all move up one.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yes.
So the 9% that gets distributed across the 3 in the center, this, again, contrived example. So this is assuming that those 3 other candidates represent, each one of them represents like the one immediately to the left of the blue eliminated person. 2% of the gold candidate there were the blue candidate voters' second choice. So all of this distribution assumes that each of those represents the second choice of that person.
Absolutely right. So the question/comment is the 9%, which by the way, these numbers 4, 3, 2, some of them 9. These represent percentages of these three candidates that were the second choice of the people that voted as this candidate as their first choice. That is absolutely right.
So let's say that they, 1% of say the purple, the one in the middle. Let's say that 2% was the second choice and 1% was the third choice. So I guess beyond that contrived example, it can get very kind of complex. There's a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, sure, it can get complex. But again, if you think of it, that everyone ranked their candidates. Again, maybe they didn't rank all of them. But they ranked them to some degree, of which one they may just fall off. Then it's just a matter of keep saying. It's just literally like I asked you, who's your first choice? Okay, my first choice was the guy way on the far right, blue. Okay. If he gets eliminated, who do you want to be your second? Oh, okay, this person, the fourth one. Well, what if that person gets eliminated? Who's your third choice? So, and again, not to kind of jump ahead a little bit, but sometimes you will hear people bring up the phrase single vote. Like, everyone should have a right to a single vote. And they look at ranked choice voting and they try to confuse you, saying this violates the one person, one vote rule. And my opinion is, it better preserves the one person, because your vote, depending on how you rank them, is going, if you rank all your candidates, and quick little secret for those of you that haven't figured it out all the way, as long as you rank all but one of them, it's the exact same thing. If there's 5 candidates, if you rank them 1, 2, 3, 4, and you don't actually circle number 5, it doesn't matter. You are implicitly voting for number 5 as number 5. So hang on just 1 second. So, how do you answer the question? Okay, go ahead.
Maybe I just add one thing. So you just think that every voter's vote, the highest ranking candidate is count. That's it. So if someone eliminated, who is the next highest ranking candidate?
Right. Right.
Good. Any other questions?
Can I play devil's advocate for a second?
Please play devil's advocate.
What do you say to people that can say, oh man, this is just too damn complicated?
Let's be said, we're jumping ahead here.
Yeah.
It's too complicated. Well, complication, I think, two aspects to it. One is the voter, 2 is the tabulation. So the first category, voter, again, some opponents will say, oh, this is too complicated. And I say, come on, if you were, let's say, a 4th grade teacher, do you think you could ask your students to rank their favorite lunches or favorite snacks? And I mean, by definition, it's more complex because in the old days, you circled just one. Now you have to circle your first, second, third, and fourth. Also, I think it's interesting, the example I showed on the screen looked like a paper ballot, right? It had little rules, and the implication used. But for those of us where I vote, it's an electronic voting machine. So if the machine said, here's your 5 choices, who's your first choice? Okay, this one. And then it said, oh, okay, here's your first choice, here's the remaining 4. Who's your second choice? I mean, how complicated? I mean, to me, that doesn't seem unbelievable. So the second part of your question is the tabulation. But, Cesar, I know you're a computer guy. How difficult would it be?
No, that's not, but, I was more like, that people are gonna say, how you're asking me to think more.
To do more work, yeah.
Yep.
To do more research.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do more work. But let's face it, I think I can put all of this in an Excel spreadsheet. You just give me the voter distribution and I'll put it in a spreadsheet. The minute you enter that last cell, I'll tell you who won. Right? I mean, it's just not. Any other questions?
Do you know if our machines could be programmed to do ranking?
Yeah, so the question is, can our voting machines be programmed? The answer is yes. So, I mean, I mentioned they've been using this in Maine since 2018. So all the major vendors make it. I mean, they make their
So
machines
they already
in this
support it,
particular
right?
software load. Now, it may not be the software load that we are using at the moment because we're not using actual voting, but it would be voting machine with a different software load. hold that thought because I want to get through it, but that's a good question. Maine, they're still using it, no change. Alaska is a more interesting story. I don't know if you're aware, but they, what it's called issue one, they don't use the word issue. They had this issue in our last election in 2024 in Alaska. They said, look, we just implemented this in 2022. Certain powers that be said, we don't like it. Let's fund a campaign to get rid of it. It was issue one, and then they don't call it issue, it's something else. Proposition one or something. And in early November, when the election results were first being announced, the get rid of it was winning. And it was winning up until one of the very last bits of votes were cast, and keep it won by 700 and something votes. Yes, extremely close. So they are still using it in Alaska.
What kind of arguments did the people who wanted to get rid of it use?
What kind of arguments did the opponents use? Well, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Yeah, Sarah? Sarah Palin was in the 2022.
Yes.
That's a great case study, and I'd like to talk about that if time permits. No, that's a good question. That's one of the things I would like to talk about if we have time. Any other questions kind of on the mechanics of how ranked choice voting works?
Just out of curiosity, does this allow write-in voting?
Yeah, so the question is, does this allow write-in voting? And there's certain videos you can watch on YouTube about the Alaska, I don't know if it's the Secretary of State, somebody running this, and it's always, when we talk about these scenarios where there's 5 people, you can guess number 5 is always all the write-ins, because collectively they only got 0.0% of the vote. But yes, certainly you can write the person in. Yeah.
So is it usually to try? Or is it maybe the I was just thinking, like, do you have a primary system or
So the question is it limited to 5? Because these examples are 5.
yeah, or is it,
It could
do
be,
you still have a primary?
oh yeah, this talks about how to run the election. It doesn't say whether it's a primary. Open primaries, which is a related topic, which we can get into later if you all like. This is really nothing directly to do with open primaries. This is just a way of running the election to tabulate the votes. And it doesn't matter whether there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or how many candidates you have, the same process of counting first place votes, if somebody gets 100%, if not, eliminate the last place finisher and retabulate. It has nothing to do with how many. Now, in this example, which again is a contrived one, you can imagine a person that would have won under the old system, right, the 43%, would cry foul. Say, wait a minute here, wait a minute, I got 43% of the votes, and this person who originally got some lower number eventually overtook me by all this reason. Something's not right. Well, whether it's right or not, you all can be the judge. There's nothing wrong, it's just a different way of running an election. So this, I think, is from the state of Maine. So this is an example on the paper ballot how they direct their voters. But this goes to one of the questions about complexity, right? So you have to be able to read these instructions and realize for any one row or column, I need to only have one circle. That's it. Yes.
So in the areas where they're using this system, how is it reported to the public at the end of the night?
So the question is how in places where they use this, how is it reported? Well, I think you can easily report by round. Say, hey, round 1, here's the results. If you're using ranked choice voting, look at that last place finisher, redistribute, take their second place votes. Instead of here's the results after round 2. Just like I can collect this data off the Secretary of State or Ballotpedia or whatever, I think you can give the data to everybody and again in the spreadsheet, saying there's only so many permutations of ranking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right, or however many there are. You can just list them all and say, here's how many people fill out this way, this way, this way. So people could self-check it, say, look, I don't trust the voting tabulation, I want to see the raw ballots or the raw ballot data and run it myself. Go right ahead. Like I said, I think I could put it in a spreadsheet. Okay, all ready for the pop quiz. With the current system, single choice plurality wins. Is it possible that the winner is the least favorite of the majority of voters? Yes. And so, for again, some of the opponents that jump up and act indignant, like, well, we can't use this ranked choice voting thing. Lord knows what could happen. I say, well, Lord knows what could happen. Then we could be electing the candidate that the majority of people like the least. How often would ranked choice voting result in the same winner as the current system? Never, rarely, often. We'll do a quick count here. Who says never? Who says rarely? Who says often? I mean, it's debatable, but I would say very often. Matter of fact, again, I said that the specific Ohio elections that I showed were primaries. The reason I didn't show general elections is because of our Congress and our gerrymander maps. Hardly any of our general elections for U.S. representative are anywhere close. They're all winners win by 60, 70, 80%. So in that case, you could say, well, ranked choice voting won't make any difference at all. The winner's going to win, in a highly Democratic district, the Democrat's going to win on the first round. Highly Republican districts, the Republican's going to win in the first round. It doesn't even matter if you use ranked choice voting in those cases. Primaries, it matters. Do I need to rank all of the candidates? We already talked about that. Again, I'm a software guy. That's a feature, not a bug. I'm going to make you rank candidates you know nothing about. You can stop if you're like, I'm done. These are my choices. I don't have any of these other candidates. Someone says, oh, you have an exhaustive ballot. I say, well, okay. We have things called exhaustive ballots. We have them today, by the way. No one seems to be complaining about it. With RCD, if a candidate receives a majority of votes in the first round, do any of the second, third, fourth choices matter? No. If a candidate receives a majority of votes in the first round, the election's over. More than 50%. Yeah, sorry. A majority of votes, yeah. So what are the advantages? Ranked choice voting ensures majority support. I think this second one is particularly applicable. So particularly if you say you go back to the second example, the tribe example we had with 5 candidates and they were kind of distributed. What is your incentive as a candidate? You could, if you're playing current politics, appeal to your base. You don't really care if you torque off people on the other end of the spectrum, because you don't care about their votes. You care about energizing your base so that you win a plurality of votes. Now, if you're competing in a competitive field, you're going to be actually trying to listen to all your voters, because if you are not their first choice, you want to be their second choice. This is the one that probably is most often mentioned with ranked choice voting. For all those people, and I know several people have said, not me personally, but I have friends who said, after the Perot campaign, I had so many people come up to me and said, I would have voted for Perot if I thought we had a chance to win. And how do we know? We don't know how many people would have voted for Perot if we had a chance to win. So you can vote for who you really want to. If you really want to vote for the Green Party or the Libertarian Party or the No Names Party, because that's who you really want, you're like, I'm afraid of wasting my vote. You won't be wasting your vote. Pick your second favorite candidate. Pick your third favorite. And again, as an IT guy, I always like this. I say this is a better way of running an election because we gathered more data from the voter about what they truly want. Any questions?
I think number 2 is the most appeal.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Just survive an election season with all the television ads.
Helps depolarize the society.
Yes, depolarization, good point.
So what are the negatives?
So good question. Question is, what are the negatives? Well, again, I'm a proponent. The negatives are, gosh, we have to get a new software load for our voting machines, we have to educate voters on how to rank and, how to meaning, make sure you circle with your paper ballot, one circle per column per row. Again, it's electronic ballot, I think it's no-brainer. The machine can guide you through that. To me, this is, when I got involved with this, I kind of sat back and said, well, this is a no-brainer. It's just a better, to me, it just seems a better way, period. So I'm not the right person because I'm not sure I see a lot of negative, other than people will say, we'll get to some of the common arguments, but I believe most of the opponent arguments to be false. So there is some data on this. I've read this what's called the Fairweather Brief. That is hyperlinked in the PowerPoint. If you want a copy of these slides, I've got a piece of paper, and you can either take my email address, which is at the end of the presentation, or you can come up here and give me your email address, and I'll mail you these slides, and you can look it up. Not to get too far off on a tangent, but we've actually had a form of ranked choice voting in Ohio in the 20th century in 5 different cities. In Cincinnati, Hamilton, Cleveland, and I'm forgetting the other 2. Ashtabula, and Toledo. We had a form of ranked choice voting. In Cincinnati, it existed for almost 40 or 50 years before they finally repealed it. For reasons I don't want to get into in this talk, but the truth of it is they were getting too many diverse candidates. Some people didn't like that. After many attempts to repeal it in Cincinnati, we finally repealed it. The topic is not dead. There are municipalities in Ohio that continue to look at this. The Fairweather study that I'm kind of quoting here talks about representation of women. I'm just going to summarize. I don't want to go through this in great detail. I don't know how we're doing on time. But the statement that ranked choice voting seems to promote greater diversity of candidates seems to be borne out in the data. All right, my favorite topics. Common misconceptions. And not only have I heard this just in casual conversation, I've heard this by Ohio lawmakers in our state house say some of these things in public. And at first, I was a little bit naive. I thought, well, maybe they just don't understand. I've heard it often enough, and I think that candidates or some of our elected representatives are actually trying to deceive what they say. Well, I truly believe, several of us that volunteer were actually, were there when testimony, I'll get to that in a moment. And I can tell by the questions some of the people on the committee were asking that they really didn't understand the way ranked choice voting works. So some of the common arguments, it's too confusing. It's up to you if you think ranking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 first choice is too confusing or not. My guess is 100% of you in the room can handle it without any difficulty. Violates the one person, one vote. I think it not only doesn't violate it, I think it actually protects it better. People like to throw out, it compromises election integrity. We already have reported problems with election integrity, and this is just going to make it worse. And this is just a complete kind of fabric. People just throw this out there, I think, hoping it's going to stick. Because if you ask them, how is it going to compromise election integrity? People have said it, I've never heard an answer to that next question. They just throw it out there. Yeah, so maybe the question is, would it make it easy to cheat? But I don't quite know how to answer that. If you record if you record the votes, and again, there are only so many permutations, how you can rank 4 or 5 or whatever many you have, say this is the votes that we received. I don't be honest, I don't think it's any more or less likely than cheating with today's system. I mean, if you can get in and change people's votes, you can get in and change people's votes. If you can't, then there's no difference. This one's slow down the tabulation. We talked about this a little bit. I think it's interesting because there is a YouTube video, again, of this woman in Alaska, election official. She's in an office and it's dark, but she has windows and it's dark out. Of course, it's Alaska, and it's November, so it's probably dark all day. But she's doing it, and it's like ding, 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 ding. Okay, there's the. I mean, it's just funny that it's so simple. As we all know, it is. I mean, this computation. I used to teach computer science. I think I could have given my students this as a lab. Most of
If you get counting by hand, I can see that.
yeah, if you're counting by hand,
Slow you
you can
down.
slow down the. Come on, it's a computer.
Right.
What do computers do well? Count. Okay. Let me get through this and then I'm gonna make sure people have other topics. We can talk about Alaska, we can talk about Alaska. So I mentioned the one URL, ready-to-vote.ohio.org, sign our petition, financial donation, volunteer your time. We have lots of volunteers. I'm always looking for other volunteers. You can volunteer as little or as much as you like. I encourage you to sign our petition, because what this really does, it just gets you on a mail list. So even if you're just like, I want to just kind of stay in the loop, I don't want to volunteer, but I want to know what's going on. Sign up, you'll get our emails. At some point you're like, this is too much, you can opt out. But one of the things I encourage all of you, when I first did these slides, I used ban singular, because at the time that we did this, there was a, this was in 2023, Senate Bill 137 attempted to just ban RCD. So I'm talking about Ohio State Senate, that bill, Senate Bill 137. It never, or it hasn't yet advanced out of committee. They were essentially saying, we don't use ranked choice voting. We're going to make it very difficult for municipalities to use it. Because there's something called home rule in Ohio, which Senate Bill 137 will violate home rule. One of the reasons it probably has not advanced that committee. Since that time, the House has gotten into it in 648, I think it's House Bill 648, also says let's ban ranked choice voting in Ohio. I encourage you to make your representative and your state senator both aware that you oppose the ban, because my answer is, why do you want to ban it? You may not like it. And should ban something that's dangerous, right? Something that just shouldn't be. This is just a different way of voting, and in my opinion, a better way. So why are you trying to ban it? And I've written to my representative and senator and said it's a valid, proven way of running elections. Other countries have used this for decades. Ranked choice voting for decades. Maine's been using it since 2018. Alaska's been using it since 2018. You can't argue that it doesn't work. It works. There's existence proofs out there. Okay. I'm going to stop there. I know there was one comment about Alaska. I did want to talk about Alaska for just a minute because, one, it helps reinforce how RCV works, and it's a real-world example. So in the 2022 election, their representative, I think his name was Young, he had passed away earlier in the year. He had been there because of Alaska's population, he only had one member in the House of Representatives, U.S. House of Representatives. He passed away, and so it had a special election, and they were using ranked choice voting. And again, I think it was a good case study because out of their primary system, they had essentially three, they had more than three, but three candidates that mattered in the end. They had Mary Peltola, who was a Democrat. They had Sarah Palin, who was a Republican, and they had Randy Begich, who came from a long line of politicians in Alaska. He's a Republican also. So they used ranked choice voting. In the first round, Peltola had 40%. At the end of one of the rounds, after they got rid of the write-ins, and I think there was a fourth candidate that dropped out since the primary. So they other than the write-ins, they only had 3 candidates. Peltola had 40%, Palin had 31%, and Begich had 29 and 28%. So how do you do ranked choice voting? Well, if we have 50%, take the last place finisher Begich, look at his 28% of votes, look and see who was their second choice. That pushed Peltola over 50%, and she won the election. Now, in 2024, so a couple months ago, Begich unseated Peltola. He's now, but in 2022, Peltola won. And they still use ranked choice voting in 2024. Begich just won straight off. He got 100% first round. So there were people, particularly in the Palin camp, that cried foul. Oh, I didn't get elected. But I thought that was a great example, because if you were voting along party lines, Palin and Begich were both Republicans. If all the Begich supporters really wanted Palin, another Republican, they would have selected her, and they would have beaten Peltola. But that's not what Alaska voters wanted. The other thing I like to point out is, if you were using the old system, Peltola would have won. She got 40%. That was more than anybody else. So if you're using the old single choice plurality wins, she would have been the winner. So I think it's a good use case of how ranked choice voting works. Yeah.
So does this eliminate the primaries? and just
No,
put
it says nothing to do, you can use it in the primaries and the general. Nothing to do with, so I've talked mainly about races where again you have a single candidate, right? Our examples, which are examples where there's slightly different rules that can be applied if you're going, you're doing a primary, you're going to put forward the top 5, something like that. I don't want to get into that right now. You can also use ranked choice voting just slightly differently in those cases. But ranked choice voting has nothing to do with whether it's the primary or the general.
Can you mention something about open primaries?
Yes.
Can you address that a little bit?
Sure. So again, separate but related topic, open primary, but not what we have in Ohio, right? In Ohio, you go into the primary and they ask you, right, do you run a Republican or a Democratic? And you can only vote essentially in one primary, Democratic or Republican. Alaska, when they adopted ranked choice voting, they also adopted open primaries. So they got to vote for whoever they wanted. And like the top 4 or top 5, whatever they pick, they can say we're having an open primary with top 4, or an open primary with top 5. That, again, that's nothing directly to do with ranked choice voting, that's a different decision. And then whoever receives the most of those in the top 5, let's take the 5 case, advances to the general election. You can have 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat, or the other way around, or, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and 1 Libertarian. Just whoever finishes top 5 advances. By open primary means you no longer have these party segregated primaries. That's why they call it open.
Is that what,
I actually don't know about Maine.
Yeah, Maine has a partisan primary. So basically, each party, they use ranked choice voting to rank their candidate and come up with one candidate go to general.
right, so then people who didn't get in the primary, like a Democrat who only got like the second choice, could they then run in the general election like as an independent?
I guess
Is that how it works?
if they have enough support, of course, nobody can stop them, just like in our current system. But the party nominee will not be the second candidate.
But I mean, to your question, if you're running a top 4 or top 5 primary and you're not one of the top 5, you can still ask for people to vote for you as a write-in. But you're the top 5 and you didn't make the top 5, you're not going to be on the ballot.
Well, I was just to make like an example to get Alaska, how did we get the 2 Republicans that are on that?
Because they have an open primary.
Okay, so they have to.
Alaska does have open primaries. Like I said, the same bill they passed right before 2022 instituted limitations on campaign financing, open primaries, and ranked choice voting. We put it all in one bill and passed that earlier, I think in 2022 or 2021. So their election in 2022 was quite a bit different.
Could you make a case that open primaries are more efficient because you don't have to have a primary and a general election?
So the question is, I'm not sure that makes sense. The question is, do open primaries make it so that you don't have to have both a primary and a general?
Right.
I mean, I suppose you could do anything. Usually the primaries are earlier in the year, in March or whenever they are, and the elections happen in November. And I think they want that to whittle down the number of names they have to print on the ballot. So I don't think those people would be too keen on getting rid of the primary.
Yeah, I build on what Chris said, because theoretically, you can just use one election with a lot of candidates
Be done.
and the rank of the long ballot. But then by doing that, eventually, a lot of ballots will be exhausted and make the election representative. That's why we still want the primary to kind of trim down the candidate.
The purpose of the primary is to trim it down to something that they're. Yes.
Can you give us like a snapshot of where this is in Ohio? Because I know like I've signed the petition at the farmer's market.
Yeah.
Seen,
So the question is, where is this used in Ohio? Right now, it's not used, to our knowledge, anywhere.
Or
in
like
Ohio.
where is.
Oh, there's lots of
Franklin?
municipalities. If you go to our website, Rank the Vote Ohio, or there's Rank the Vote, which is a national, there's a long list. There's like 70, 80 municipalities in the United States that use it. And for instance, Washington DC just passed, but they're not using Rank, which is what they do also. They passed that in the November election. Washington DC.
New York City, and Seattle. And also a lot of cities in Utah. They are
Cities in
using,
Utah.
yeah.
Other topics that people would like to address?
How likely is it that the hospital in San Carlos has?
Yeah.
How likely is it that they're going to continue to get out?
Well, that's a $64,000 question. The question is, how likely are these Ohio State Senate and House? They both are right now. But this is the way our state house works. We were concerned, and I'm no expert in how our state government works, so take what I'm saying to be slow. It's quite possible they could have tried to rush this in at the end of the year. They're supposed to have opportunities to provide testimony. You have to look for it. Sometimes they won't announce it until the day before, and they borders on their trying to sneak something past us at certain
Well,
times.
I think the issue is that they got into office on a, single
Right. So
system, and so the actual people in office may not be that motivated, may be very motivated to keep ranked choice voting out, because it could make it so that they could lose possibly their seat. And so that's a very challenging part of the whole thing.
there were two sponsors, for example, for Senate Bill 137. One was a Republican and one was a Democrat. So. Yeah, and if you kind of read some of the literature and find both opponents and proponents, you'll find both. You'll find opponents, both Republican and Democrat. You'll find proponents who are both Republican and Democrat. But by and large, I hate to say this, parties view this as a threat. Hey, I've kind of worked on building my party base in my district. I don't want third parties coming in or somebody with a broader appeal, Now, not everyone, I'm not trying to paint everyone in a bad light here, but we've seen opposition from both parties to rank choice voting. Yes, sir.
What is the mechanism of adopting this process? Is it by popular vote? Is it legislative
Right, so
action, or how?
how does it get adopted?
Yeah.
So, kind of two answers. At a municipality level, so if the county or city wants to use it, it's by that mechanism, they have to adopt it. This, we were talking earlier, a city council will have to say, we want to start using ranked choice voting. As some cities in Ohio did in the 20th century. At the state level, it would require, okay, there would be two choices, either get our elected representatives to just make it happen through
So there's not just one way to do it, there's multiple
the,
paths.
I think the likelihood, given that both our Senate and our House seems to want to ban it more than adopt it, that doesn't seem likely. So the other alternative would be, Ohio Constitutional Amendment, as we just saw with, But at the municipal level, it's just a matter of convincing your city council or mayor or whoever's in charge to say, hey, have you considered ranked choice voting?
Well, it would seem to me very similar to issue one. That was the gerrymandering. Education of the public on something that on the surface looks very complicated, I think is going to be really tough.
Yeah, so I think you're pointing out that voter education is a challenge. And I hope, to be honest, one of the reasons we have these talks is you leave here thinking, it might sound complicated, but it isn't really that complicated. Most people can figure this out in a little while and say, oh, okay, I get how this works. Like I said, they've been using it in other countries for decades. Probably if you went in there and said, this is a terrible way to do it, they'd say, what's so terrible about it? Been using it successfully for quite a while.
I don't think it's not that big a deal to voters. Whose favorite candidate is obviously at the bottom. They can make that their number one, knowing that that person doesn't have a sort of chance of getting it. But making it known that they like this person.
Yeah.
But then sometimes it's skin in the game by having a second or third
Right.
choice.
Yeah, so you're talking about, again, encouraging third party or candidates who would not be perceived as popular or whatever for that, encouraging them to run. I think one of the things people need to realize, if we use it all the time, so say you ran, say for Ohio representative, and you ran hard and you tried to, and people could use ranked choice vote, you might say, hey, I'm going to vote for, what is your first name? Amy, I'm voting for Amy, and she got 20% of the vote. Under today's system, you'd probably get 1%, right? We'll say, he's not backed by anybody, it's a waste of vote. And you get 20%, you may say, look, instead of throwing in the towel, what's it going to take to get me from 20% to a majority? You'll never know that today if you run, because you're going to get 1%. You're not the established party candidate.
Well, it would encourage more people to vote.
Encourage you to vote, well, absolutely, because those people are not. How many of us felt like, I don't want to vote because I don't like either of those people?
I saw something in the news recently, it was just in the past week, it was that they're asking, there was a poll about how many people in the country identify as Republicans and Democrats, and the number of people who identify as independents was low.
Yeah,
So it was just thinking that would like, this would appeal to people.
well, absolutely. Absolutely would appeal to them. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna ask, what do you think or suspect, you're asking for people to volunteer their time, what do you think is the tipping point that's gonna get people to vote for something like this in the future?
So, it's a good question. What's the tipping point, or how do you kind of convince people? I think where we are right now in 2025 is the best path forward is to implement this in several cities or counties or municipal governments in Ohio. Again, the existence proof. Once you say, look, we made it work, it's working, it's in place, nothing to be feared.
But you said it's in other countries and we're not convinced by that, so that's what I'm wondering, like, what would we?
Well, so part of it is things like this, right? So you all
Yeah.
can leave here today saying, okay, I think I understand ranked choice voting. If someone brings it up, I can now speak somewhat intelligently about what ranked choice voting is. Because again, education is the end game. And by the way, we're free. I'll come and talk to you if you want to have a house party and invite some of your friends over, whether it's me or one of the other speakers from Franklin, Ohio. We don't charge. You just say, I'd like a speaker to come and speak. So whether it's a Kiwanis or PFW or just your neighborhood, whatever, please feel free. We can tailor these talks to any audience in any duration that you like. Because again, education is the main thing.
Can we get you in the state house though? A lunch and learn.
Well, I have offered to my representative several times and have not heard back.
What about school social studies?
Civics classes.
I did hear that my kids had learned about it in their government class.
Really?
Here in high school.
I didn't hear that.
What school is that?
Some of the things currently, if you went online and decided to sign up to volunteer, what are some of the current volunteer jobs?
So, current volunteer jobs would be things like continue our outreach. So again, if you sign up at our also volunteers on communication. The Speakers Bureau, which I'm a part of, but it's just a process. You could study this and say, I'm going to become a speaker. And as long as you pass a little bit of vetting, you have to do a test for the position. You can become a speaker and speak to your own communities. Fundraising. It's not like we're really trying to squeeze everyone's wallet to death, but we're mostly a volunteer organization. But we do have things called community organizers. And so, raising money is another thing. If we get to the point, like let's say City of Cincinnati says, yeah, we're serious, we want to look at this harder. And having people do policy research, maybe work with, how does this need to be worded? Are we going to combine it with open primaries? Are we not? It's going to be top 3, top 4, or top 5. How are we going to do it? So there's lots of assistance we can be giving municipalities who may be looking at implementing ranked choices.
Is there information about how, like, New York City and other places that have implemented this, like, what arguments do they use?
I don't have a quick answer for you. Just a side note, there's actually a documentary film about Alaska's experience in 2022 called Majority Rules. So if you Google for Majority Rules, and I've seen it, it's actually a pretty well done documentary. It talks about the Otola, Palin, Baggage race, and also about the Shabak and Murkowski. So they do ranked choice voting for their senator also. So that's one example. There's other examples. I don't have any quick one to give you off the top of my head. Other questions?
So Chris, you mentioned our effort at the city level. Can you talk to the audience about the city needs like efforts?
I think it's, well, there's several. There's a couple in the Cleveland area. University Heights, I forget the names.
Lakewood?
Lakewood. There's Riverside, which is in the Dayton area. And I know that the city of Cincinnati is looking at it. I don't know the state of what they're doing. Again, Cincinnati was the one that used this for the longest in the 20th century. They used what they said, 40 years or something, a form of ranked choice voting for their city. So get involved. I mean, if you happen to know, like, hey, I live in this municipality and I know this council person or the mayor or whatever, take a moment and say, have you guys ever considered ranked choice voting? And if you don't know enough about it, I can get you hooked up with a speaker who will inform you about ranked choice voting.
Chris, thank you so much. This is a wonderful presentation, and like you said, education is the name of the game, so we really appreciate it. The library is open for about 20 more minutes, so if people have questions, feel free to ask away.
Thank you all. Again, if you want